If you're a missions-minded person, well, you don't even have to be a missions-minded person. If you read the Bible, and you see the emphasis that we've been talking about on the world's peoples, then that is what you are comfortable with.
We're doing a class right now at course called Global Missions in the 21st Century. And as a part of the key course content for this class, we're doing interviews with leaders from around the world. And we are excited to release these to you and invite you to pull up a chair and listen in to these enriching discussions. Today, I am joined by Dr. Todd Johnson, who is the director of the center, or I guess, are you the current director, or you've been the director for many years?
A co-director.
Co-director, okay, current co-director, but been the director for many years of the Center for the Study of Global Christianity. They're at Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary. You've been a co-author of multiple editions, I believe, of the World Christian Encyclopedia. I had the privilege of meeting you personally at the Lausanne IV Congress in Seoul through our common friend, Hannah Nation with the House Church Center for House Church Theology, and we got to spend a couple hours in the airport on the way back. So getting to know a little bit more of your story, someone I've read and referenced your work for many years, but to get to meet you in person was a real delight. And so thank you for joining us today. And for those tuning in, we are doing a course this semester, this quarter, on missions in the 21st century. And in that course, we're looking at some major trends over the past several decades of world Christianity. Where is the church growing? Where is it retreating? And why those kinds of meta trends and how that impacts missions and getting the gospel to peoples and places where it's not. And so, Todd, you've had your eye on that for really your ministry career, if I'm not mistaken. So just to kick us off here, as I said, you've spent your career mapping the growth and movement of Christianity across the globe. How did you end up in this field? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, well, I as a 20-year-old, I went to Thailand, and I worked in refugee camps there, where the Cambodians had been pushed across the border by the genocide, and so that really helped me to see the nature of the missionary task. Though I had been other places around the world as well, but I really kind of settled in there. I went to language school to learn Thai after I moved back to Bangkok, and I thought, well, this is it for me. I'm going to spend the rest of my life here because I really love Thailand and I love the language and all of that. But in talking to other people who were coming through constantly, I began to hear about the need for more research. Essentially, there were many missionaries and missionary, people who were working in universities and seminaries. Bangkok was a place where a lot of people were meeting up and that sort of a thing. So that had an impact on me. And then my leaders were praying for me and felt that I was supposed to go on this kind of path. No one quite understood because I'd actually dropped out of university to do all of this travel and everything. So it was that, and I also had kind of a bent in this direction that went back to elementary school. Like I was a math tutor when I was 10 or 11 years old for other kids, just because I loved math so much. And I thought, well, I had to give up math for my missionary call. But when I went back to Southern California, I realized that if I was, going to be involved in this need for research, that I would have to, go back to college, and I did. I went all the way through from finishing my bachelor's degree all the way through a PhD, and then began to see how I could fit in, with the research, with the global research, as it turned out. because when I got to the PhD level, I ended up working with the world's leading Christian statistician or demographer, David Barrett, and unwittingly um, sort of lined myself up to be his successor, as he was 30 years older than me. Um, and that's where I got into the encyclopedia business. So was through him. So that was kind of the path. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's wonderful how, God takes those genuine desires to serve him and to serve his name among the nations. And, we think it's going to play out a certain way, but he also knows how he's wired us and the gifts he's given us that we end up serving in a different capacity. But nevertheless, it's still connected with that heart for Christ's name among the nations. And so it's neat to hear all the way back to a 10-year-old tutoring math and how God used that in your story to bless many. Now, an interesting fact I learned about you while we were laid over in the Seoul airport was that your father-in-law is none other than Ralph Winter, one of the most influential missiologists of the 20th century. So I'm curious, how has his legacy, of course, through his writings and through his ministry, but you knew him up close. You knew him quite personally. How has he shaped your own thinking about global missions, and where maybe have you, thought a little differently than he did?
Yeah. Well, the story is connected to what we were just talking about, and that's where really the providential side came in, because when I came back to the U.S., I really didn't know where to go or what to do, and almost immediately I ran into him because I was with Youth with a Mission in Los Angeles. And I actually lived on the campus of the U.S. Center for World Mission, which, by the way, this month, here in March of 2026, we're celebrating sort of the exact, uh, what am I saying here? Let's see, I better get my dates right. 50th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Center for World Mission. So that's 1976. I came back from Thailand in 1980. So it was, but I'd actually lived on the campus in 1978 before I went to Thailand.
Mm.
And I had met Ralph and Roberta Winter even then, but I reconnected with him. And one of the first things I did was to take the Perspectives on the World Christian Movement course. Which had just a book had just been published along with the course, and I was in that first group of people who took it, and of course that helped me a lot with this idea of where my vocation was going. But I did spend time with them. My connection became increasingly personal as I discovered that Ralph and Roberta had 4 daughters, and 3 of them were married. The youngest was Trisha, who was just finishing her own degree in cultural anthropology at UCLA.
Mm.
And we became good friends, started working together, and just a few years after that, got married. So then I was a part of the family as they were in the process of sort of completing the sale, or the purchase, I should say, the purchase of the campus in Pasadena.
Mm.
So we spent 5 years on the campus together after we got married. Um, so I got a strong love of research with him. I even co-presented a couple of papers and kind of learned how this whole thing was done. I also grew in my love of books, and much to my new wife's horror, I was buying and bringing home books, and we didn't really have much money, so I ended up buying books for the library in Pasadena, so we wouldn't go bankrupt ourselves. But that became a lifelong quest, which he supported my habit. He had a habit himself of buying and reading important research, and uh, and he actually had a strong belief in the value of research for the type of goals, reaching all the peoples in the world and that sort of a thing. So he saw that connection right away, and that's when my love of math came right back. I had no idea I'd ever see it again, and the next thing I knew, I was using it quite a lot as a student.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the difference is, uh, looking back now, I can see one thing that I see differently is partly the chronology, because of course I'm quite a bit younger, and he passed away in 2009. Um, he knew the church was growing around the world. That wasn't an issue, because he had students at Fuller who were from everywhere. But sort of the shift in who leads in global mission is what was just happening at the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
not it's not even complete now, but that's something he might not have anticipated. Because the Western missionaries were, sort of the primary force in mission um, at the time that the U.S. Center for World Mission was founded, and we had 70 different agencies on that campus.
Mm-hmm.
So we, we saw a lot happening, but the world is very different now, and of course, that would be one area that sort of the ground was changing under his feet, and of course, it's very likely changing under my feet as well now. But um, and the nice thing is that it's really good news. It's not a bad thing to see that happen. Um, so I think that's one area where there's maybe some difference in ideas and so
Yeah.
on.
Well, I'm sure most of our students know who Ralph Winter is, I hope, but some of our listeners might not, but we don't have to go into detail. But just for a point of reference, he was in the Lausanne 74 Congress, really brought to the world's attention, or the evangelical world's attention, that this idea of people groups and unreached people groups, and
Mhm.
the conversation and missions shifted from reaching nations, geopolitical entities, to no, there's these ethnicities that are shaped by language and culture and history and affinity, and it's the peoples. It's like in the Old Testament language of the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, all those ites that we read about in the Old Testament. You know, we find those similar groupings today in different ethno-linguistic groups. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it was really at that point that, at least in evangelical missions, began to really zero in on ethno-linguistic people groups as the um, the target, if you will, of where we need to get to in terms of new church planting, new missionary activity. And then the research about, well, how many of these groups are there? What makes one group different than another group? And they're growing, they're shrinking. What's the status of the gospel? The research kind of followed from that. Am I right in summing that up?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And lists were created, books were written about these different peoples. And David Barrett, who of course was the one counting Christians in the whole world in every country, was also paying attention to the ethno-linguistic situation. And when I joined him, we created the first comprehensive global list of the world's peoples. And in a sense, what was happening in Pasadena is they were just collecting names of groups that might be unreached. People were sending in names, and that was fraught with a lot of problems. People would send in names like the Norwegians, because they were. I mean, I actually saw that piece of paper that came in, but it was from a tiny little Pentecostal church in Oslo. And, he said, no one here's a Christian. Of course, they're all Lutherans, but no one here's a Christian. And I'm not even sure about my wife, so, and in fact, that's a very important thing to realize when you get into this, that, who's deciding, who's unreached, and more narrow you become, the more unreached there are. In a sense, everybody except for you and your church, are unreached. And that's been a hazard all along, which some of us in the late 90s came together and basically said there's no such thing as a Christian unreached people. So if you're evangelical and you think the Catholics are not Christians, we're not going to put Catholics on a list of unreached people. You can go there if you want, and you might, do some good work. That's not the issue, but it doesn't belong under this rubric of frontier missions. So, and with Barrett's work, the good thing is that we were sort of assessing the presence of Christianity in all the peoples of the world, and then you can see the difference between places that have a lot of Christians, or I should say peoples that have a lot of Christians, all the way to those that have absolutely none. So it becomes more of a comprehensive way of looking at it, and you can make a divide, wherever you want in that, and that's why there's differences in lists and that sort of a thing. So,
yeah. Well, before we move on to major trends, I do want to just ask, like in your history with your tenure at the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, like what were some aha moments along the way, or breakthrough moments perhaps for you and understanding? And then I want to follow that up with, for somebody who's looking at this from 30,000 feet, the data, the numbers, what keeps it from becoming just math? In other words, how have you kept your heart engaged with the Lord in your work? But first, just tell us, like, what did you learn over this tenure about the state of Christianity in the world?
yeah, well, that's what brought me back, let's say, to Cambodia, where I had been a young development worker in the refugee camp. Um, because we were tracking this, we then began to see remarkable places where there was remarkable change. And Cambodia was one of those, because the church was very small before the genocide, and many Christians were killed, from 1975 to 79. They were part of the 2 million or more Cambodians who were killed in that genocide. But the church kind of reemerged and began to grow. And I was one of the first people that was able to come in and meet new Christians um, who were, seeing the gospel grow in the country, and I was able to assess what was going on. I just returned there last year on sabbatical, and had a wonderful time with that group of leaders, which has grown even more, of course, now. And in fact, one of them passed away just a few weeks ago. One of the kind of the fathers of the post-genocide Christian movement. So we got to see that sort of a thing firsthand. Nepal was another place where I visited very early on, and then was able to see what was going on. So, when you're in the business of watching, you do see a lot of interesting things, and and Mongolia was another precious place for me to visit and be able to interview leaders. Everybody is a recent Christian in a situation like that. And it's sort of when I was visiting Cambodia, I thought, this is like visiting the first decades of Christianity in the New Testament. It's because everything's brand new. And Mongolia is very similar. The timeline is even, after 1990. Um, so that's just really an amazing thing. And maybe I can answer the other question right on top of it because they're related. And that is, you can't really sit in an office somewhere and just and do the math. There's a lot of math, but a job like this or a ministry or vocation includes constant meetings with people from around the world.
Mm.
So all of it's there's faces and names and there's prayer. So there's strong connections to the church itself that keep it from being just numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So the personal relation side of it is maybe a little unexpected because you think, oh well, they're just coming up with lists and everything, but behind it is hundreds of people, thousands maybe around the world who we have interacted with, a lot of it in person.
Mm-hmm.
Like the meeting where we met. Boy, I mean, I talked to people one after another there were many Mongolians there, you might remember. So I got to see my Mongolian friends there, and I have been in touch with them. They visited me here in Boston, some of them. Some have come as students here, and so that keeps me grounded.
Yeah.
Is the personal relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. Um, Behind the numbers, or behind every number is a story, is a life, is is one whom Christ loves, and yeah, I guess it's easy to think in a center, in Boston, where they're cranking out these lists with these, it's easy to imagine. Yeah, that's kind of where the action is, but you're all over the place. You're traveling to Cambodia and Mongolia and China and other places to meet
Yeah.
and to talk and hear firsthand and do the more ethnographic type interviews and get to know their stories. What a wonderful vocation God called you into. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some trends. We're looking at that in this course. We're reading different sources, but one is Timothy Tennett's book about Trinitarian missiology. But he opens the book by talking about mega trends that are reshaping global Christianity, and there are numerous books on this theme. And Lausanne report that they released a year and a half ago, has these different mega trends, and people, slightly different lists, but some major trends do come to the fore. Which one do you think is perhaps most underappreciated by the Church in North America, or which ones maybe
Mm.
do we not even really take account of, or perhaps even know about, or maybe we've heard, but it really doesn't matter to us that it should matter to us?
Yeah. Yeah. The biggest trend is the shift of Christianity to the South, but I think we'll get to that later. And I think there's probably more awareness and appreciation of that because again, I think most of us know personally Christians from Africa, Asia, Latin America. It's hard these days not to, almost no matter where you live, there's Christians from around the world nearby.
Mm-hmm.
And the personal thing changes everything. Personal relationship changes everything. But I think an area that I'm teaching about, I'll be teaching in this fall again, is underappreciated, and it's interesting because it sort of comes right back to my initial contact with people who'd never heard the gospel, and that was in the refugee camp in Thailand with my Cambodian friends. and and one of the things that was happening when Ralph Winter was saying in 1974, there's all these people who've never heard. Latin Americans were in at that meeting as well, and they said, in addition, or in parallel to this, is the fact that there are many people suffering around the world from poverty and disease and lack of education and so on. And the gospel is equally to be engaged in demonstration as it is in proclamation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And this got a name eventually of integral mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's really important for us as evangelicals to be committed to proclaiming and demonstrating, But I think it's underappreciated, and people, I've been trying to understand this. I think one thing is sort of misconceptions about what's eternally significant. Because people have said to me, we don't do that development work, and that's what I'm going to teach on this next fall. We don't do development. We don't minister to the poor because that's temporal. What's permanent or eternal is, the people encountering the gospel. But that's not a New Testament way of talking about it. Because Jesus didn't see it that way. I mean, he himself is really our model, and he cared for people who were sick and hungry and so on as something of eternal significance. It's an easy mistake to make. And what you do, what I've heard again from different people, is, look, we only have so much time. We're just going to proclaim. We're not going to, we're not going to waste any time. And one person even said, we're not going to try to make people comfortable on the road to hell.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just so, so harsh for a Christian to say something like that. It's not a Jesus statement.
Mm-hmm.
It's an American statement,
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there's even a book which was published in '72 called "The Great Reversal," and it gives a story of why evangelicals used to care about the poor and don't anymore because of some things that happened in the 20th century. So that's why I would highlight that as something that really needs to be practiced. Now, the interesting thing is, when I went to Thailand, or when I was working in Thailand, no longer in the refugee camps, what I noticed is that the ministry to Thai people, which was mainly the OMF people, Overseas Ministries Fellowship, that ministry was highly integrated, and the missionaries were right there when Thai people needed them. They were serving in every imaginable way. And in fact, that was my really first impression of what a missionary was. They were preaching the gospel, but they were also serving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They were demonstrating it constantly, day in and day out. And to me, that was such a great example. So I was a little surprised to learn later that there was opposition to this idea.
Yeah.
So I think, but I think actually most of us sort of naturally, as Christians, as people that have been discipled, we lean in this direction of an integral, holistic is another great word, sort of a holistic approach, and we would never, separate these out. We'd be there to care for people, which I think all of us have opportunities. I know we're heavily engaged with the immigrant community here where I live, and people stay in our home and they know it's safe here, with us, and because we don't separate these. we think of these together. So maybe that for me would be one of those trends that would be most important to.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I would have, so I remember reading about, of course, obviously I wasn't there. I'm far too young, but at the Lausanne 74 was one of those moments where, there was a lot of wrestling around this issue, and it was, Rene Padilla and Samuel Escobar, and some others that really gave voice from Latin America, gave voice to it. And I said, wait a minute, I think God cares about the whole of us, not just, the soul, and critique this, uh, dichotomy of body soul dichotomy that sometimes the Western tradition has fallen into. And there's so many biblical ways to address that fallacy.
Yeah,
Perhaps just love God and love your neighbor. And think about, if my child is drinking water out of a ditch and getting sick from it, I'm going to want to get her some clean water to drink. So why wouldn't I want that for my neighbor? There's
sure.
a lot of ways biblically that we can address that false dichotomy. But
Yeah.
and one of them is just that by loving people in action, that does bear witness. So there's witness by word, and both are witness bearing things. What we say and what we do, and how we live towards our neighbor, uh, and how we live as the Christian community, distinctive lives of characterized by love and holiness. All of that is witness
Mm,
in one sense. But you
yeah.
mentioned right at the beginning of that, one particular community, or a kind of person that needs particular holistic care is migrants and folks in the diaspora. Can you share a little bit more about immigration and migration patterns that highlight this need for very tender care from the church? What do you see globally, and why this is such a big trend?
Yeah, I was just reading a little statement yesterday, which I really like. I mean, if you study the history of Christianity, the movement of people is very important to the spread of the gospel. It's, like I'm taking my students to Turkey and Uzbekistan in a few weeks for a course, Religions on the Silk Road, and we'll be looking at how migration, constant movement of people actually spread the good news everywhere. And one of my friends who studies this, he said, there's this little phrase. I don't know exactly where he got it, but he loves it. I think it's great too. And he said, if you're a Christian, you will probably travel. And if you travel, you might become a Christian.
Mm.
See, so I just love that. Um, and there's a lot being written right now about the diaspora ministry and all of that. But I think that well, one of the ways that we can break free of maybe our own limited way of experiencing the gospel is to encounter people, Christians from around the world, and that's why the United States of all places, with really good laws and government and everything, would be a great place for Christians from around the world to encounter each other and so on. So and actually working in a refugee camp and seeing, I saw more than 50 of my students became Christians, my Cambodian students, as I was able to share the gospel, and then they spread all over the world,
Mm.
and they continued witnessing. Because most of them were relocated. The situation was dire when I was there. So um, and so I saw it firsthand. And I actually ended up, for a period of time, I went up and helped refugees resettle in the United States. Right after I got back to the U.S., I went up to Tacoma, Washington, and just saw all of the difficulties, but saw the joy of coming into a new place. And I saw what they had to offer me and other American Christians. So So I just think it, it's a life-giving thing for us, the body of Christ, to encounter each other and to live out our lives in diverse situations instead of everybody,
Mm.
um, everybody together. And there's a counter movement. It's a very odd movement in the U.S. I read the story of a conservative white evangelical Christian in California who said, I just can't take this diversity anymore. And he moved his family to Idaho to a gated white evangelical community. And he said in the interview, he said this. He said, I miss Christendom. And
Mm.
I thought, you shouldn't miss Christendom. If you're a missions minded person, well, you don't even have to be a missions minded person. If you read the Bible, and you see the emphasis that we've been talking about on the world's peoples, then that is what you are comfortable with, not everyone being of the same ethnicity.
Hmm.
And you can celebrate your ethnicity. I mean, that's not a problem. That's it, a lot of good things come out of that. But you shouldn't want to isolate yourself from the Revelation 7:9 vision of all the peoples. So I think I'm so grateful to be living now with this awareness of the diversity of Christianity, and personally, like I said, personally knowing Christians from all over the world. It's so life-giving for us. So to try to move in the opposite direction is really odd. Biblically speaking, it is odd to not want to embrace the family of Jesus, from around the world. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I can relate personally to the guy in the interview you're talking about it, and growing up in the South, uh, in our high school yearbook, the seniors had to put like whatever a theme song for them, and I put Hank Williams Jr. If heaven ain't a lot like Dixie, I don't want to go. And of course, behind that is a lot of lost cause,
Yeah.
narrative. That I didn't have the grammar to explain that, but it was just. Seeped into my psyche and view of what the good life is. And now I'm like horrified that that is in there. But praise God, his became
Yeah.
converted in college, and then really through experience in China and Tibet, and with Christians from as you're describing, God really transformed me from the inside, and now that Revelation 7:9 vision is one that I long for. To be at the
Mm.
table with all the children of Abraham and Jesus Christ who belong to the family of God from every tongue, tribe, and nation. That's what I can't wait for that, great banquet to happen. But it's such a
Mm.
contrast from, what I previously envisioned heaven to be
Mm.
what I wanted. And, so that guy's going to be very uncomfortable actually if he makes it, which I hope he does, but he will be shocked that it's not
Mm.
what he wants,
Mm.
not what he imagined. But with migration, just there's so many uh, outbreaks of violence, war, conflict that has people just moving all
Mm.
around, just desperately, seeking, quite honestly, to survive and braving, getting on little rafts and braving violent
Mm.
seas to get across to some other safe place. That the peoples of the world are on the move in mass numbers. And as we think about global missions, to ignore that fact, we really are sticking our head in the sand
Mm.
and ignoring not just the plight of human, of other humans, but just opportunity
Mm.
that God and His sovereignty is bringing about through that movement. But um, well, earlier you mentioned the majority of Christians in the world has shifted from the North and West to the global South and East, Asia, Latin America, Africa. Um, what, in your view, how should that? What implications does that shift have on how the church in the West should engage in global missions? And particularly, how should the missionaries who are, there's still a strong missionary fervor in North America. People still want to go, and I think that's a good thing. But how, how should this shift impact how they go and what they're trained and what kind of missionaries are coming out of here? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I would agree with you too that all Christians have this missionary responsibility in one sense or another. We're all, we're a community that has a message for the whole world. Let's put it that way. So the shift in Christianity doesn't change that fundamental truth, but what it does is it changes who we are, who we are globally. And several years ago, I was reading a book called The Post-American World for Reed Zachariah, and it's mainly about economics and that kind of thing. But in the first chapter, he sort of deals with a possible objection to this whole idea, and he said this is not a book about the decline of America. It's a book about the rise of the rest. That I like. I think that's for Americans in particular. We're not being pushed out, but we have a new reality of that we have to get used to. That there are people of all different from all different countries and many different languages who are now co-participants with us. Now we're having trouble making that transition, even though it's really good news. In fact, I think it's that might be the other thing that's shifted since Ralph Winter's time. Is who we are, even as a mission force around the world. But I've grappled with this idea. How can we find ourselves in the new situation of global diversity and being in a minority of Christians worldwide? And I had an encounter in Wittenberg, Germany, that helped me a lot. In fact, I was there at the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, so it was 2017, and I presented a map which showed that 40% of all Protestants in 2017 were Africans. And there were about 100 people at the meeting, and I think there were 6 or 7 Africans. So we didn't really represent the Protestant church. But after a couple of days, somebody said from the front, they said, "We want Africans to know that you're welcome at the table here at our meeting." I was sitting next to a Ghanaian who leaned over to me and said, "We have a proverb in Ghana. It's good if you invite me to the table, but it's better if you invite me into the kitchen." And I thought, okay, that's what Zachariah was talking about. That's the challenge we face, because there's still a lot of inviting to the table. Menus already set. A lot of the resources are found in the Western world. So it makes sense that this would sort of continue on. And a lot of Western leaders are just grateful we have a whole new group of people who we can tell what to do. I mean, that's a terrible way to put it, but in a sense, this is the new mission force. I think everybody realizes that, but the difference of having everybody in the kitchen, that's going to change the flavor, of who we are. And I've actually thought, I just taught Christian-Muslim relations, a history of Christian-Muslim relations this last semester, and I've thought so many times that the world's Muslims don't need to join a Western religion. In fact, there's a kind of a tense relationship between Islam and the West. And part of why Muslims aren't interested in Christianity is they don't like some of the bad things that they've seen in the West, that they equate with Christianity. So I personally think that that Muslims should encounter the global Jesus, the Jesus of all peoples.
Hmm.
Because one thing that happens when you do that is that you then say, hey, my culture, my language, even some of my religious background can make a contribution. I don't need to give up my culture in order to become a Christian. I don't need to become American or Western to become a Christian. So I think it's actually quite a strategic thing as well. So I think that's the fundamental matter is being a part of a global movement in which that people have equal say.
Yeah. Well, the how I love that Ghanaian proverb, better to invite me into the kitchen. I thought you were going to go. I thought he was going to say something like, "Well, whose table is it?" Because welcome
Yeah,
at our table. Still, it's who's
yeah.
the host, who's the guest. When I think we really ought to, and neither is it African church's table or the church in Asia.
Mhm.
It's not the Chinese church table. It's. I think we have to get used to the idea that this is a table that Jesus has set. This is a mission that Jesus has started. We're all invited into as co-laborers, but there's been such an imbalance in money, resources, leadership, institution, etc., that it's hard to make that adjustment to say, wait a minute, we're actually, you know, equal co-laborers in this. We're all following one master. That is a new reality that I'm not sure we fully embraced. And it's, I think, particularly difficult for Americans to embrace that because America is geopolitically the dominant, force in the world. And so it's just easy to imbibe a sense of power. We're ministering from a place of power as opposed to ministering from a place of vulnerability and weakness. I'm not sure we know how to minister from a place of weakness because we haven't had to go through that in our 250-year history here. But it's a new reality. Tell me what you think about this. I've become more and more convinced that so if an American wants to serve in global missions, because of it was always the case, but especially now because of the complexities of you're not just dealing with an unreached people group that has no Bible, never heard the gospel, although that is very, very, very complex and requires a lot of years of patient labor. But now you're dealing with, well, there's also a local church and leaders and differences in perhaps doctrine and theology and worship and how they express it. So you have to navigate multiple complexities simultaneously. And certainly if you go to an urban context, well, there's multiple people groups and there might be churches or leaders within those. And it requires a lot really of the missionary to be able to navigate those things wisely. Um, and so I've become more and more convinced that we need more training and preparation and maturity, not less. But that cuts against the grain of the short-term missions movement. And I kind of joke that to be a missionary in America, really all you need is a passport, and then you can be a
Mhm.
missionary. So I obviously I say that a little tongue in cheek, but it's not too far off from the truth. But can you speak to that? Like, are we right to think that to be, and not either or black and white terms necessarily, but the more prepared someone is, the better they'll be able to serve in this highly complex global missions environment.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's it's critical nowadays. And in fact, I've done some teaching about what does it mean to be a person who is adept in a global context. And there's actually training that has come out of Europe, um, which is recognizing that in a secular sense
Mm.
that if you are going to operate in a highly globalized world, you need to be trained to do well in essentially crossing cultures.
Mhm, mhm.
And there's different characteristics of a person who can do this. And I think that they've hit on something that translates well into the global Christian context and the global missions context.
Mhm.
And I think you're right in saying that in the past, people said, well, you better train in cross-cultural communication so that you can reach the people you're trying to reach. But what was unanticipated is you're surrounded by other people as well. Even your team members,
Mhm.
might be from Brazil and Malaysia and South Africa. And I had a little window into this when I was only 20 years old with the Cambodians because I was the only American on the team. And there were 8 of us, and we were from 8 different countries all around the world. And we were sharing the gospel. And one day, one of the Cambodian students we were working with looked at us and said, "Who are you people, and where are you from?" Because it was like we were saying, we're from planet Earth, and we want to tell you the gospel. Because it wasn't tied to any one country and I've often thought the look on his face, and he was one of the ones who became a Christian.
Mm,
Look on his face was he encountered Revelation
mm,
7:9, right? And he said, "What is this? What
mhm.
is this religion that is so compelling that it would draw people from all over the world?" I think that
Mhm.
was kind of the shorthand. Now we can't always do that, but I thought, man, this is really good. So I would say I would anybody I would hope that any Christian would be good at crossing cultures within their own family, within the Christian family, and of course with other people as well. And I just comment on 2 maybe unexpected characteristics of a global person that come from this study, which I think are very good for Christians too. One is curiosity,
Mm,
where you genuinely want to know about the other culture that you've encountered. That's really important. And there is a lack of curiosity that we talked about earlier. And the other is empathy.
mm,
So you're not only curious, but you're empathetic. So these are Christian, so global Christian virtues, you might say, um, that we want to grow in these kind of skills, let's say, or just the way of operating as a Christian who's now living in a global context. And that's part of what will help Americans navigate the rise of the rest. And
mhm.
in the end, the best thing about all of this is it's good news, actually.
Mhm.
There's no way in which the spread of Christianity among all these peoples is not good news.
Mm.
But it does present us in the West with the challenge to get used to this diversity and not go live in Idaho. Let's poor Idaho in this case. But so I think that's the thing we should all do is really invest in getting good at working with people, and that will serve us. That'll have serve us in 2 ways. One is it'll help us with the global church, and second, it will help us with people who are not Christians.
Mm.
So you cannot go wrong to really invest in becoming good at crossing
Yeah.
cultures or communicating across cultures.
Yeah, that is so well said. And the curiosity and empathy being 2 virtues, I think underneath both of those is love, right? I mean, love is
Yeah,
curious.
yeah.
It's a curious thing. It seeks to know the other, and then as well as empathy, it weeps with those who weep, and it rejoices with those who rejoice. in a sense, I hesitate to use the word incarnational, not in the sense that could be repeating what Christ did, but in like manner, becoming, entering into the life and ups and downs and brokenness and griefs and sorrows and pains and joys and of someone else. That is the Christ-like move towards another person. Very well said. So just, in closing here, any final, word I mean, that kind of served as a word of challenge and encouragement, but anything else you'd want to say to students or those listening who have an interest in global missions? And then I'll ask one final question, just what gives you the most hope when you look at the data, and what also keeps you up at night? Maybe answer that one first, we'll end on hope. So any final word? And then, what are the things that concern you? And then the last question being, what gives you hope as you look at the data?
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe a final word is to draw in an area that's kind of unexpected, and this has happened to me personally. What do you do in a world where we're not listening to each other? We're not really engaged as much as we should be. And I think that's a strategy of the enemy, both for our Christian family and for our human family, that we wouldn't really listen, we wouldn't really engage. So living in that world, who would we go to in order to uh, get some ideas and intelligence on how to operate? And for me, one thing I always mention is the role of indigenous peoples around the world. And in my case, I've been able to forge a friendship with Caitlin Curtis, who is a Native American Christian who has written what it's like to be a Native American Christian. There's many First Nations in Canada, the Aboriginals, and actually indigenous peoples are all over the world. And the gospel has come to many of these people, but they're the last people to be listened to. And so I've felt like maybe it would be good to turn that upside down and listen to what indigenous people say. And actually, the irony is that many of them have developed these skills at crossing, because their lives have been a crossing of cultures,
Right.
from the bottom where they've been put, and that's developed a lot of wisdom and humility and things that have helped me greatly. So I would encourage all of us to listen, especially to those who are the last to be listened to. I think that's a Christian virtue as well. I mean, and our Savior modeled this humility. No one is left out of this global conversation. And there's just so much beauty in indigenous peoples. It's the image of God. When it's found in those considered the least, it's really in some ways the greatest. So that's been helpful to me. And what keeps me up at night is, well, it's what we've been talking about. So anything that denies the the global nature of our faith is what I find difficult. And to, even to see fellow missionaries around the world, now that we have social media, supporting anti-immigrant sentiment. I just I cannot get my mind around that. How you could be working faithfully, and these are my friends around the world, working faithfully, and yet push back against the global nature of our faith, that's the hardest thing for me. Um, and so I want to work on that. And you don't, working on that, I think is returning to the scripture and emphasizing, what the Bible says about the world's peoples. So there I am. I'm actually back after all these years. I'm back where I started from with Ralph Winter. You see, I'm essentially, working in the very area that he was highlighting. Don't forget the world's peoples. I'm essentially doing that myself now, and doing it, I guess gently and but with conviction. And when you're dealing with core biblical um, themes, then there's a comfort in that.
Mm.
And maybe that's my hope then. My hope is that both the scriptures emphasis on the world's peoples and the fact that the world's peoples are at our doorstep, um, is just such a great combination. And one thing for me that is personal, I was just in Minneapolis, where I'm from, with my mother, who just turned 90 years old. And when I left my home, my boyhood home, I had never met a Thai person or a Buddhist or anything. But when I went back to visit my mom, uh, the house next door to my boyhood home, there's a Thai woman living there with her husband. And I thought what it would have been like for me to talk to her about Thailand before going,
Mm.
and what a difference that would make. But I went all the way around the world to meet my first Thai person and Buddhist, and now there's a, a woman living right next door. I just think that's the wonderful thing about migration again.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. I want to close our time in prayer, but before I do, just again, thank you for spending the time with me this morning. It's been a blessing. It's been, uh, yeah, a real encouragement to see your humility and your sincerity demonstrated over a lifetime, is particularly sensitivity to those who are hurting and those who might be overlooked. And yeah, it really has encouraged my heart here this morning. So thank you. Let me pray.